The story begins not in 1994, but 30 years later, on an overcast morning in 2024, when a sidewalk repair crew in a quiet, residential stretch of Elm Street struck something unexpected. The men had been tearing up a section of cracked pavement, their jackhammers echoing off the rows of aging houses, when one of the operators called out. Embedded in the broken concrete, wedged into the pocket where soil met rebar, was a small object. Dust and lime clung to it, but its shape was unmistakable. A child's shoe. Scuffed leather, faded pink. The kind sold in chain stores across America in the early 90s. The men paused, looked at each other, and then kept staring at the shoe as if it had appeared out of thin air. What unsettled them most wasn't just the shoe itself, but the fact that it was trapped beneath concrete that should have been untouched for decades. The discovery quickly drew attention. Crew leaders phoned supervisors, who in turn contacted city engineers. Soon, police tape was strung across the block. Neighbors leaned over fences, murmuring. Someone whispered a name, then another. Within an hour, the connection had surfaced. In October 1994, twin sisters, 9 years old, vanished while walking home from school just 2 blocks away. Despite desperate searches, no trace of them had ever been found. Not a button, not a scrap of clothing, not a shoe. Their faces, frozen in the amber of missing persons flyers, had haunted the community for years before fading into silence. Now, decades later, here was something that should not exist, unearthed by chance, and it lay beneath. A slab of city sidewalk poured the very month the girls had disappeared. At first glance, it could have been dismissed as coincidence, a lost item buried by time and shifting soil. But official records complicated that explanation. Maintenance logs insisted that stretch of sidewalk had not been repaired since 1987. No orders, no work crews, no documented reason for fresh concrete to have been poured in 1994. Yet the construction itself told a different story. The concrete where the shoe was found was cleaner, less weathered, with rebar that looked distinctly newer. To the trained eyes of the repair crew, it was obvious that section had been tampered with far more recently than city files admitted. That gap between what the records claimed and what the evidence showed was where the darkness began to seep in. The shoe was bagged and sent to evidence, though not before several crewmen swore it matched the description given in the original case file. A pink Mary Jane with a missing strap. Within hours, rumors rippled across Elm Street. Elderly neighbors recalled search parties combing the block in 1994. Woman remembered hearing police dogs barking near that same stretch of sidewalk, only to be told later they had found nothing. The families of the twins, now older, more brittle, had lived 3 decades without closure. News of the shoe reached them through a phone call that sounded more like a cruel prank than official notification. After so many years of silence, the smallest fragment of leather had ripped open every scar. By evening, local reporters were outside the taped-off sidewalk, cameras pointed at the gaping concrete cavity. The story led nightly broadcasts. After 30 years, a possible clue. Viewers across the county saw a grainy close-up of the shoe as it was lifted from the rubble, its tiny size striking against a gloved hand. The official police statement was measured, even evasive, reminding the public that no conclusions could be drawn until lab testing was complete. Yet the visual spoke louder than words. People did not need lab reports to know what they felt. Something buried had finally surfaced, and it contradicted every official assurance that nothing had been overlooked back then. That contradiction was the real beginning of the case. A sidewalk that should have been untouched since the late 80s was, in fact, broken and poured in the precise window when 2 children vanished. A city with no record of repairs had a sidewalk stamped with the story of something hidden, and a family who had been told to move on suddenly faced the possibility that their daughters had never left Elm Street at all, that they had been underfoot, literally beneath concrete the whole time. The unearthed shoe was not simply a piece of evidence. It was a rupture, a splinter jammed into the narrative of the town, and a warning that the truth, whatever it was, had been deliberately sealed away. October 12, 1994 was a Wednesday, cool and windy, the kind of autumn day where the leaves chased each other down, cracked sidewalks and school children zipped up jackets against the early dusk. The twins, Emma and Claire, had been released from their elementary school just before 3 in the afternoon. Teachers remembered them as quiet, inseparable girls who always held hands when they walked. one slightly taller than the other but otherwise mirror images. They lived less than a mile away, close enough that their parents felt comfortable letting them walk home together, as they had done dozens of times before. That day, the girls had promised to stop by the corner store for penny candy before heading straight back, a ritual that made them feel just old enough to be trusted. The walk was ordinary, unremarkable, until it wasn't. Classmates recalled seeing them, laughing outside the school gate, adjusting their backpacks, and heading east down Elm Street. A crossing guard confirmed they passed safely through the main intersection at Maple Avenue. From there, the route was simple, 3 blocks straight, a left turn and then home. Yet somewhere along that short stretch of cracked pavement, the twins simply ceased to exist. The shopkeeper at the corner store swore they never came in that day. A postal worker remembered seeing 2 little girls turning onto Elm, but he could not recall if it was that exact afternoon or the day before. The timeline dissolved into gaps and contradictions. When the girls did not appear at home by 4 o'clock, their mother began to worry. By 5, panic set in. She phoned neighbors, then the school, then finally the police. Officers arrived around dusk, took a statement, and reassured the family with practiced calm. The girls were probably at a friend's house, perhaps hiding after a quarrel, maybe even testing the boundaries of independence. It was 1994, and runaway narratives were a convenient tool for easing parental fear, especially when no evidence of foul play immediately presented itself. Patrol cars circled the neighborhood, shining spotlights into backyards, but the search ended quickly. That night, the twins' beds remained empty, their toys untouched, their school folders lying neatly on the kitchen counter as if waiting for tomorrow. The following days blurred into a frantic cycle of hope and dread. Volunteers canvassed streets, stapling missing person flyers with the girls' smiling faces onto telephone poles and store windows. Search parties combed vacant lots, parks, and drainage ditches. Bloodhounds were brought in, noses to the ground, but their trail led in circles around Elm Street before abruptly stopping, near the block where the sidewalk was later revealed to have been replaced. At the time, that detail meant little. Police told reporters the dogs were inconclusive, and the community accepted it. What lingered, however, was the silence, the absence of any object, any item of clothing, any dropped book bag that could anchor the girls' last steps. The official narrative hardened within a week. The case was labeled probable runaway. Detectives suggested the girls might have been lured into a car, but offered no details, no suspects, and no concrete leads. Their parents were left bewildered, caught between guilt and outrage. They knew their daughters. They knew the girls were timid, rule-abiding, and deeply attached to family routines. The idea they had run away was absurd, yet every plea for deeper investigation seemed to vanish into paperwork and bureaucratic platitudes. Reporters moved on after the initial wave of coverage, slotting the case alongside countless other missing children whose stories flickered briefly before fading into archives. In the neighborhood, rumors festered. Some whispered about a man in a city-issued jacket seen lingering near Elm Street that week. Others remembered a construction truck idling after school hours, though no permits for such work were ever recorded. One neighbor, years later, swore she heard the sound of digging at night, metal striking earth, but at the time she dismissed it as utility maintenance. All of these fragments remained scattered, uncollected, their significance ignored because there was no physical anchor to bind them together. For the families, 1994 never ended. Emma and Claire's parents kept their room intact for years, beds neatly made, drawings taped to the wall, toys arranged on shelves as though expecting the girls to burst through the door at any moment. Birthdays passed in hushed rituals, candles lit on a cake for children who were not there to blow them out. The official story told them to move on, that perhaps their daughters had simply slipped beyond the reach of reason, but in the pit of their stomachs, they knew something had been buried, something that explained the hollow silence left behind. And now, 3 decades later, when a crew pulled apart the very sidewalk the girls should have walked across that autumn afternoon, the first real clue emerged. It was as if the street itself had been keeping the family's secret all along. The present-day investigators arrive at Elm Street in early spring, nearly 30 years after the disappearance, when the neighborhood feels both familiar and strangely hollow. The houses are the same modest brick and siding constructions, but their paint has faded, porches sagged, and the oak trees that once shaded children on their walk home now loom taller, their branches twisted like watchful arms. The air carries that particular suburban quiet, broken only by the hum of traffic 2 blocks away and the occasional bark of a dog. To walk the same route the twins took in 1994 is to feel time collapse. The short distance between the school gates and the place where the sidewalk was torn open suddenly stretches like an unending corridor lined with memory and unease. The first impressions are sensory. Cracks run along the remaining stretches of sidewalk, small tufts of grass pushing through as if reclaiming what was once covered. Streetlights still stand where they did decades ago, but many appear dim, patched with mismatched bulbs, leaving pockets of shadow that even in daylight suggest concealment. A mail slot clatters in the breeze, and the clink of chains on a swinging porch chair echoes like footsteps. Every detail conspires to make the investigators imagine what it must have felt like for 2 9-year-old girls, backpacks bouncing, voices rising and falling, their shoes tapping against this very pavement. The ordinariness of it is what unsettles. The idea that a space so ordinary could have held such a devastating rupture. As they retrace the path, they note how few natural surveillance points exist. Blind corners, driveways shielded by hedges, fences with narrow gaps, all create moments where children could vanish from sight for seconds at a time. Those seconds matter. One turn of a head, one car pulling up, one door swinging open, and the fragile chain of normalcy could be broken forever. They pause at the crosswalk where the girls were last confirmed by a crossing guard. The paint is faded, but it still runs across the asphalt like a scar, a reminder of a moment that seemed so safe, so routine until it wasn't. The investigators linger longest at the block where the sidewalk slab was replaced in 1994, standing before the raw cavity of concrete still exposed. From the repair crew's work, they sense the weight of absence pressing upward from below. Soil smells faintly damp, and shards of broken pavement jut upward like jagged teeth. It feels less like a construction site and more like a wound reopened. A few steps away, they find the faint traces of spray-painted symbols left during the recent excavation, fluorescent arrows marking utilities, but beneath those bright marks lies something subtler. Etched faintly into the bordering pavement is a faded circle with initials, the kind of marking children scratch into wet cement. Though the letters are too worn to confirm the possibility they belong to someone from that era, only deepens the uncanny impression that the street itself has been recording its own buried history. Details that once seemed ordinary now feel like anomalies. Why is there a break in the style of pavement exactly at the block where the twins were last seen? Why does the concrete there look smoother than the weathered slabs on either side? Why were no official records kept of a repair that was obviously completed? The investigators take photographs, measurements, and soil samples. They document how close the sidewalk sits to the storm drains and how easily someone could have concealed debris in the cavities below. To anyone passing by, it may look like procedural note-taking, but every detail is heavy with implication. Each measurement feels like a thread tugging at the carefully woven narrative officials insisted on for decades. As dusk settles, the street changes character. Shadows stretch longer, and the street lamps flicker to life, throwing pools of amber light that fail to banish the darkness between them. The investigators continue walking, absorbing how the environment itself may have contributed to the disappearance. In the silence, they can almost hear the footsteps of the twins, light and quick, voices carrying with the wind. Then abruptly, the imagined sound is gone, leaving only the stillness of a place that has been holding its breath for 30 years. The first visit confirms what the paper files could never capture. This is not just a story of 2 girls lost, but of a space altered, streets that were subtly reshaped, records that don't align with what is visible, and a community landscape that seems designed to hold secrets. Standing there, the investigators know this is only the surface, the first glimpse of something far deeper and far more unsettling than the disappearance itself. Elm Street is no longer just a route home. It is now a crime scene that has been hiding in plain sight. The neighbor who opens her front door is older now, her hair silvered, her hands veined and trembling as she carries a shoebox out to the porch. She explains in a voice both hesitant and brittle that she had found the box while cleaning her attic the previous week. Inside, beneath layers of curled newspaper and old receipts, were a stack of Polaroids, faded snapshots from neighborhood block parties, school fundraisers, and summer barbecues taken between 1992 and 1995. She had not looked at them in years. Not since the twins disappeared and the street fell. Under a shadow people preferred to forget. For her, the box was meant to be a time capsule of better days, but now it felt like evidence heavy with unspoken guilt. The investigators gather around her kitchen table as she spreads the Polaroids out, each glossy square bending slightly at the corners, the images tinged with the warm hue of aging film. At first they are simple, mundane memories. Children tugging on kites, fathers manning grills, mothers laughing with plastic cups of soda in hand. But one picture near the bottom stills everyone. It shows the twins, Emma and Claire, unmistakable in matching jackets, walking down Elm Street. Their small frames are in motion. One girl turning to look at the camera, the other mid-step. Behind them, just to the side of the frame, sits a large city truck parked at the curb. Its orange stripe and utility logo are faint but legible, even decades later. The investigators exchange glances. The truck is troubling not because of its presence, but because of when the photograph was taken. A date scribbled on the Polaroid's white border reads, Oct7-94, the exact week the girls disappeared. The neighbor swears she snapped the photo during the annual fall cleanup party, when the block gathered to rake leaves and tidy yards. She remembered the city workers offering to help haul brush that day, though now, 30 years later, the memory curdles into something else. The city had no record of sending crews then. Official logs insisted no work was done on Elm Street that autumn at all. The photographs are examined one by one under brighter light. In several, the same truck appears parked at different angles, sometimes in the background, sometimes just partially visible at the edge of the frame. In one, a man in a reflective jacket stands beside it, his face blurred from motion but his posture tense. He is not mingling with the neighbors, not part of the community scenes, but always on the periphery, always watching. The neighbor admits she never thought twice about it at the time. Back then, a city truck on the street was so ordinary, so invisible it barely registered. Only now, knowing what would follow, does the presence feel like intrusion, as though the truck were part of a plan that unfolded in plain sight. As the investigators catalog the photos, the atmosphere in the room grows heavy. The neighbor wrings her hands, confessing she has avoided this box for years precisely because she feared what it might confirm. She remembers police interviews after the disappearance, remembers mentioning the cleanup party, but no one had ever asked her for photos. She assumed they weren't relevant. To think now that evidence sat untouched in her attic for decades fills her with both shame and anger. If they'd looked harder, she murmurs, maybe we'd have known sooner. The photographs become more than mementos. They are artifacts that tether rumor to reality, the vague whispers of a city truck on Elm Street in October 994 are suddenly anchored in visual proof. Combined with the shoe pulled from beneath the sidewalk, they create a chilling implication. Work was being done that week, by people who should not have been there. In the exact place 2 children vanished. The Polaroids strip away deniability. What was once dismissed as neighborhood gossip now sits on glossy squares of film, undeniable and permanent. The investigators pack the photos carefully into evidence sleeves, knowing this discovery shifts the case from theory into tangible contradiction. Official records may claim nothing happened here in 1994, but the camera tells another story. And the story it tells is that someone in a city jacket, someone with access to heavy equipment, was present on Elm Street during the most critical window. The photographs, forgotten in a shoebox for 3 decades, are no longer innocent keepsakes. They are a silent witness, finally given voice. The paper trail begins, as so many of these stories do, in the quiet hum of a municipal records office. Rows of filing cabinets line the room, their drawers labeled with faded stickers, while newer shelves hold digitized printouts in bound folders. The investigators spend hours under buzzing fluorescent lights, sifting through yellowing work orders, city contracts, and maintenance logs from the early 1990s. At first, the files appear routine, lists of sidewalks scheduled for repair, notes on tree trimming, invoices for gravel and concrete. But soon the anomalies start to surface, small cracks in the foundation of official memory that point to something far more deliberate than bureaucratic oversight. A maintenance log dated March 1987 records a complete repaving of Elm Street's sidewalks, with signatures from a foreman and 2 city engineers. According to policy, this would mean no further repairs should have been necessary for at least 20 years, yet scattered in a separate ledger filed under miscellaneous. Expenses, the investigators find a work order stamped. October 15, 1994, just 3 days after the twins disappeared. The order authorizes urgent sidewalk replacement. On Elm between Maple and 3rd, the exact stretch where the shoe was discovered. But the contractor listed on the form, Ashford Construction, had dissolved in 1991. Its business license was revoked, its phone numbers disconnected, its office building sold off years before. How then did a defunct company complete work 3 years after it no longer legally existed? The deeper the investigators dig, the stranger the trail becomes. The 1994 work order carries an approval signature that belongs to a man who had already retired from the city by that year. His name appears in multiple documents, attached to projects that occurred well after his official departure. Either someone was forging his sign-off, or records were retroactively altered to create a paper shield for unauthorized work. Cross-referencing payroll records yields further inconsistencies. Several laborers listed on the 1994 job had no tax filings, no addresses, no trace of ever existing outside the ledgers. Ghost workers, phantom crews, names written to fill space and justify an expense line. A particularly jarring detail emerges when they request the original invoices. The numbers don't add up. The cost of the supposed Elm Street job was inflated threefold compared to other sidewalk repairs of the time. It included charges for after-hours labor and disposal fees that suggest activity beyond simply pouring concrete. Disposal of what exactly? And why at night, when most municipal work occurred in daylight hours? The invoices lead to a city dump site that, upon checking, reveals no record of receiving debris from Elm Street during that period. In essence, money was moved, paperwork was drafted, but no official trace exists of where the supposed waste ever went. The contradictions pile up until they form a narrative of their own. On paper, Elm Street was untouched in 1994. In reality, there exists a signed and stamped order, authored by a retired man, fulfilled by a dissolved company, staffed by workers who never lived. The investigators spread the documents across a table, photographs of the Polaroids alongside them. The evidence begins to align. A truck that shouldn't have been there, a slab of concrete that wasn't supposed to exist, and now a trail of falsified paperwork designed to erase the truth. The silence of the office becomes oppressive. It feels less like clerical work and more like an excavation of a cover-up, as though someone had gone to meticulous lengths to bury the truth not just beneath concrete, but beneath bureaucracy. Every forged signature, every phantom invoice is another layer of soil heaped over the twins' disappearance. What chills the investigators most is not just the falsification, it's the precision. Whoever orchestrated this had knowledge of the city's record-keeping systems. They understood how to blend fake documents into legitimate files, how to exploit gaps in oversight. This was not random or sloppy. It was deliberate, structured, and executed by someone inside or close to the machinery of municipal authority. The paper trail, once seen as a place to find clarity, instead reveals a widening chasm of deception. It does not simply tell what happened. It exposes the lengths to which someone went to ensure the official version would say nothing at all. And as the investigators realize, following these documents won't just uncover facts. It may also point directly at those who spent 30 years ensuring the twins' story was paved over, one stamped page at a time. She sits in the dim living room, curtains drawn against the late afternoon light, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The widow has lived on Elm Street her entire life, and though she has aged in the decades since the twins vanished, her memory of that time is still sharp, etched with the kind of detail that trauma preserves. Her husband, she explains, had been a foreman for the city's maintenance division. He worked long hours, nights included, often summoned with little notice to urgent jobs that, she admits now, never seemed to appear on any public schedule. For years she buried her unease. But after his death, alone with his papers and the fragments of his confessions, she began to see the patterns she had once tried so hard to ignore. She recalls the autumn of 1994 vividly. He came home late several nights in a row, smelling of concrete dust and damp soil, his work clothes streaked in gray. When she asked what project had kept him out so long, he grew uncharacteristically curt. Just repairs, he told her. Nothing you need to worry about. But his eyes betrayed something else. Fear, or perhaps guilt. On one of those nights, after she pressed further, he whispered about things behind the wall and muttered that some jobs weren't meant to be questioned. She thought he was exaggerating or perhaps exhausted. Only later would she realize he was warning her in the only way he knew how. There were other signs, too. Phone calls late at night, his voice lowered to a near whisper. Pacing the kitchen with one hand covering the receiver. When she entered the room, he would fall silent, hang up abruptly, or switch to idle chatter about overtime pay. The calls left him restless, pacing the bedroom long after she had gone to bed. She remembers one night hearing him mumble, almost to himself, "They think it's buried now. They think no one will look." At the time, she thought he was dreaming. In hindsight, it feels more like a confession. A year after the twins vanished, he changed his will. He made provisions for her in ways he had never bothered with before, specific instructions for property, bank accounts, even a request to destroy certain work documents. The change unsettled her because he was young, in his 40s, not ill, not injured. "Why so sudden?" she asked, but he dismissed her with a shrug. She wonders now if he felt danger pressing in, if he sensed that what he had been ordered to do might one day catch up with him. Her most haunting memory is from a Sunday afternoon when he was fixing a broken cabinet hinge in their kitchen. She found a folded slip of paper tucked into his wallet, a scrap with numbers and letters written in hurried pencil. When she asked, he snatched it away and snapped that it was just a work code. But she had glimpsed enough. A date, October 12th, 1994, and the letters S. Wall, Elm, Street, Wall. The sight of it chills her even now, 3 decades later. Sitting with the investigators, she admits she has carried this weight silently for years. After his death, she tried to go through his old boxes, but most of the documents were gone, destroyed. All she found were fragments, an old ID badge, a time card with hours scribbled over in ink, and a stained notebook missing half its pages. In the margins of one surviving sheet was a single line. "Don't sign what you don't see." She presses her lips together as she recounts it, her voice trembling, unsure if he meant it as advice or a confession. When asked why she never went to the authorities sooner, her eyes fill with tears. "Because I didn't trust them," she says simply. She explains how, after the twins vanished, police officers had visited her husband, spoken with him privately, and left with stiff, polite smiles. Whatever was said, it left him shaken and silent. From that day on, he carried his fear like a second skin. She felt that if she ever spoke, the consequences might fall on her too. Now, with him gone and the shoe unearthed from the sidewalk, she feels compelled to break her silence at last. The widow's testimony is not just anecdote. It threads into the growing web of anomalies, logs that don't match, work crews that never existed, Polaroids of a truck that shouldn't have been there. Her words fill in the human dimension, the man who came home stained with concrete, who muttered warnings in half-sleep, who altered his will as if anticipating judgment. The investigators leave her house with more than just a statement. They leave with the chilling awareness that someone on the inside had known all along, and that his guilty conscience had been buried just as deliberately as the evidence beneath Elm Street. The secondary tunnel branch is not something the investigators find in the official blueprints. It is mentioned only in a passing note from an aging utility map, a faded line scratched across the corner of a page, almost as if someone tried to erase it. But locals remember it, an older storm drain access point running parallel to Elm Street, long sealed with concrete and forgotten by most. The investigators, guided by that hint, follow the map to a dead-end alley where weeds have overtaken the curb. At the back stands a rusted steel grate, and behind it, the faint outline of a concrete plug poured decades ago. It looks ordinary at first, the kind of urban scar no one questions. But the surface tells a different story. The texture of the concrete is smoother than the surrounding brick, its color a shade lighter despite decades of weathering. One of the investigators brushes away moss and grime to reveal faint imprints, numbers and letters stamped into the surface. The mark reads, 1994F, a foundry stamp used for reinforcing materials. That small stamp, dated in the very year the twins disappeared, contradicts every record in the city's files, which insist no structural work occurred there after the late 1980s. The implication is clear. The seal was added not in routine maintenance, but in direct response to something that needed hiding. They bring in ground-penetrating equipment, careful not to alert city officials who already seem eager to shut the inquiry down. The readings are unsettling. Behind the plug, the sensors detect voids in the soil, cavities that suggest someone deliberately filled or walled off a section. More chilling is the irregularity in density, pockets of disturbed earth, as if something had been hastily buried before the plug was poured. It is the kind of evidence that, to an engineer, screams tampering. To the investigators, it screams conspiracy. As they document the site, they notice details that feel almost like messages left behind. A faint discoloration along one edge suggests the concrete was poured quickly, without the curing time typical for municipal projects. Hairline cracks radiate outward, their pattern resembling stress fractures caused by weight shifting underneath. Someone was in a rush. Someone who knew this seal wasn't meant to endure scrutiny for long. And yet for 30 years it held, covering whatever lay beneath while neighbors walked by daily, oblivious to the secret under their feet. The investigators retrieve samples, flecks of cement, tiny chips of aggregate, a fragment of rusted rebar lodged in the seam. The rebar carries the same foundry mark as the piece. Discovered under the sidewalk, 1994. 2 artifacts from 2 separate sites, both contradicting official denials, both pointing to coordinated activity in the same week the twins disappeared. This isn't coincidence. It's pattern. The realization sharpens the air around them, turning curiosity into dread. Even the atmosphere in the alley feels oppressive, as though the place resents being uncovered. Wind whips through the narrow corridor, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. One of the investigators swears they hear a hollow echo when tapping the plug. A low resonance like a drumhead. It doesn't sound like solid ground. It sounds like something hidden beyond. The sound lingers in their minds as they pack their equipment, a reminder that they've touched the edge of a secret but not yet pierced it. Back at their temporary workspace, they cross-reference the discovery with the widow's testimony. She recalled her husband muttering about things behind the wall. Now, faced with a literal wall of concrete stamped with the year of the disappearance, her words take on chilling clarity. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. He meant it literally. Something had been placed behind this wall, something so damning, it required not only physical burial, but decades of false paperwork to keep it hidden. The artifact is not a body, not yet, but the stamped concrete itself becomes the artifact, a physical, undeniable contradiction to the city's story. Unlike rumors, unlike faded memories, unlike incomplete logs, it is something tangible. Concrete doesn't lie. Its date stamp is as definitive as a signature, and it tells a story that City Hall has spent 30 years denying. The investigators realize that this wall is not just a barrier, it's a threshold. Whatever is on the other side may finally reveal the truth about what happened to Emma and Claire. But to get there, they will have to break it open. And with each discovery comes greater risk that someone still invested in keeping this secret buried will try to stop them. The tape arrives in a padded envelope with no return address, slipped under the door of the investigator's temporary workspace. One rainy morning, at first it seems almost laughably anachronistic, a compact cassette, its plastic shell scuffed and its label worn blank from decades of handling. The adhesive along the edges has yellowed, and inside the clear casing, the magnetic ribbon appears warped, stretched in places as though it had been rewound and replayed many times. The object itself is already an artifact, a fragment of another era. Yet in the context of the investigation, it feels deliberate, pointed, almost staged. Someone wanted this found and someone wanted it found now. They borrow an old tape player from the local library's archive, a bulky machine that hums faintly when switched on. The cassette clicks into place with a weighty finality. The sound that emerges at first is static, a rush of white noise peppered with faint pops and warbles, the kind of auditory decay that comes with age. Then, gradually, a voice rises from beneath the noise. It is male, gravelly, recorded in a cramped space. The voice begins not with names or explanations, but with a command. If you're hearing this, it's because I couldn't tell you in person. The speaker identifies himself only vaguely, never by full name, only as someone on the crew. He talks about the night work in October of 1994, about orders handed down that didn't appear in any logs. The voice is cautious, halting, as if the speaker is aware of the risk of putting these words to tape. He describes being told to seal the wall at Elm and to move dirt fast. He recalls trucks arriving late at night, unmarked, carrying not supplies but cargo. The details blur in static at points, but the implication is unmistakable. What they were burying wasn't debris, wasn't infrastructure. It was evidence. The tape grows more unsettling as it continues. The man recounts how one of his fellow workers, a younger man new to the crew, asked too many questions. A week later, that worker was reassigned, then disappeared entirely. The voice trembles when he speaks of this, pausing as though he expects someone to knock on the door, even as he records. They said it was concrete, just concrete. But concrete doesn't cry. Concrete doesn't beg. The line is almost swallowed by static, yet it freezes everyone in the room. The man on the tape is either confessing, warning, or unraveling under guilt. But either way, his words carry the weight of someone who saw and could never unsee. The investigators replay the tape multiple times, each listen uncovering a new detail lost in distortion. There are faint background sounds too, a ticking clock, a cough, the creak of a chair. At one point, a distant siren wails before fading. These incidental noises anchor the recording in the real, physical world, stripping it of any suspicion of fabrication. Whoever he was, the man recorded this in a lived-in space, late at night, with fear threading every word. They transcribe the tape carefully, cataloging its fragments. Phrases stand out like bolded lines in a confession. Elm Wall. October 12th. Poured before dawn. Orders came from above. Higher than city. Keep your mouth shut, or it won't just be concrete. The investigators know that these claims, without corroboration, could be dismissed as paranoia or conspiracy. But in the context of the stamped wall they discovered just days before, the alignment is chilling. Two independent artifacts, separated by decades and origins, both pointing to the same date, the same wall, the same secrecy. There is something deeply intimate about listening to a voice that has been preserved for 30 years. The investigators can't help but wonder what became of the man. Did he mail the tape to someone who sat on it in silence all these years? Did he vanish like the coworker he described? Or is he still alive, burdened by his secret, watching now as the case is being peeled open? The tape ends abruptly, the click of a stop button punctuating its final words. Don't let them tell you it was an accident. Silence follows, heavier than the static. A silence that seems to stretch into the present. Holding the cassette in their hands, the investigators feel the weight of its implications. It isn't just a recording. It's a cry from the past. A thread that ties their present work to voices that were silenced long ago. The cassette itself becomes a kind of witness, testifying in its own fragile way, demanding that the buried truth be confronted. And as much as it confirms their suspicions, it also deepens the danger. If someone went to the trouble of suppressing this story 30 years ago, then the arrival of this tape suggests those forces might not be finished yet. The next days bring a shift in tone, not from the artifacts or witnesses, but from the institutions that have lurked on the periphery until now. A letter arrives on official stationery, the city's seal embossed in faded gold. At first glance, it looks routine, an administrative notice about ongoing excavation activity near Elm Street, but the language is sharp, defensive, and threaded with veiled warnings. It insists that no unauthorized investigation is permitted within municipal property, that prior findings, particularly misinterpreted structural anomalies, must not be circulated without review. Buried deep in the second page is the quiet threat. Continued interference could result in legal action or the withdrawal of community support. The investigators recognize this for what it is, not a clarification, but a pushback. Someone is rattled by the resurfacing of old evidence, and now the machinery of bureaucracy has been rolled out to put the lid back on. The phrasing is bureaucratic, but the subtext is unmistakable. They are being watched and someone wants them to stop. Around the same time, local media begin receiving statements from the city's public relations office. The twins' case, the officials say, was tragic but thoroughly investigated, with no credible evidence to suggest foul play or institutional involvement. The resurfaced shoe is downplayed as a misplaced item unearthed by accident, possibly planted over the years by vandals. The tape is dismissed outright as unverified and likely fabricated, and the wall discovered in the alley. Officially, it was part of routine structural reinforcement. Its 1994 stamp coincidental, nothing more. The press releases are designed to reassure the public, but in their very overreach they betray unease. They read less like confident denials and more like rehearsed scripts, written with one eye on the possibility that someone might see through them. Community members are divided. Some echo the official statements, eager to believe that nothing sinister happened in their neighborhood. Others whisper in hushed tones at grocery stores and church steps, saying it all makes too much sense. The sealed walls, the missing logs, the widow's cryptic warnings. For the investigators, the pressure escalates in quieter, more personal ways. They notice a dark sedan parked down the street from their rented workspace. Its windows tinted, its engine idling at odd hours. At night, phone calls come with no voice on the other end, just silence, then a click. When one investigator drives home, they find their car rifled through, glove compartment open, nothing stolen. It is less theft than a message, we know where you are. And yet, the attempts to shut down the inquiry only make the investigators more determined. The contradictions in the official story are piling up too high to ignore. They revisit the widow's testimony, aligning it with the tape and the sealed wall. All three point to the same week in 1994, the same patch of ground on Elm Street, the same unnatural secrecy. The more officials insist on coincidence, the more it feels like confirmation. There is also the moral weight that grows heavier with each denial. The twins were not abstract figures. They were two children walking home from school, two sisters who never made it back to their front door. Their absence left a family shattered and a community scarred. To see their disappearance reduced to misplaced items and misinterpreted anomalies strikes the investigators as not only dishonest but cruel. The counter-narrative isn't just an obstruction, it is an erasure of lives that mattered. In the midst of this, one investigator recalls the line from the tape. Don't let them tell you it was an accident. It takes on new meaning now, echoing against the city's carefully crafted denials. The institutions are repeating the very thing the anonymous worker feared, that the official version of events would smother the truth. The contradiction grows sharper by the day. On one side are artifacts, dates, and testimonies, tangible fragments of a suppressed story. On the other side are letters, press releases, and anonymous threats, all pointing toward a system determined to close the case forever. In that clash, the investigators see the real stakes emerging. This isn't only about what happened to Emma and Claire in 1994. It's about whether truth can survive 30 years of silence when powerful forces are committed to keeping it buried. The counter-narrative, meant to extinguish suspicion, instead fuels the sense that they are close, dangerously close, to uncovering what someone never wanted revealed. And if the past is indeed buried in the walls of Elm Street, then the present is beginning to crack too, as denial collides with evidence, and silence collides with the persistence of those unwilling to look away. The breakthrough comes not through official channels, but in the kind of dusty, forgotten corner that institutions prefer the public never notices. A retired clerk, frail and bent with age, agrees to let the investigators see boxes, stored in the basement of the old county building. The room smells of mildew and iron filings, the air thick with decades of neglect. Cardboard boxes sag under their own weight, their labels faded to smudges, and rodent-chewed edges hint at years without inventory. Among the clutter, the investigators find one box whose tape is newer than the others, its lid marked with a single word in red marker, special. Inside, stacked between payroll slips and work orders, is a series of logbooks, handwritten, ledgers from the mid-1990s, that should have been digitized long ago. At first glance, the books look ordinary, filled with tidy columns of hours worked, equipment checked out, location serviced. But as they cross-reference the entries with the city's official records, anomalies begin to appear. Whole stretches of dates are missing from the public files, yet clearly preserved here in ink. One log entry catches immediate attention. Oskides 12-1994, night crew Elm St. Seal, 11:45 p.m., 4:15 a.m. The entry is underlined twice. An unusual emphasis in otherwise uniform handwriting. The initials beside it belong to the very foreman whose widow had warned of her husband's late-night projects. The hours coincide almost perfectly with the time frame the anonymous tape described, when trucks rolled in and orders came from above. Yet, in the city's official timeline, no such job existed. The more they dig, the clearer the pattern becomes. Several workers are listed as present that night, but in subsequent weeks their names vanish from the records entirely, replaced with new hires or reassigned to departments that leave no further trace. The investigators trace one of those names, only to discover the man had died in a workplace accident months later. His obituary bland and unremarkable, with no mention of his previous position. Another name leads to nothing at all, no records after 1994, as if the person had evaporated. Alongside the logs, tucked into a folder of miscellaneous papers, is a memo typed on thin onion skin paper. Its header bears a faded city letterhead, but the text is brief and chilling. Proceed with reinforcement as instructed. Do not record materials delivered. Seal inspection not required. The date. October 11th, 1994, one day before the logs show the wall sealed. The memo is unsigned but stamped with an internal code that, when compared with other paperwork, ties it back to the municipal engineering office. It is the first hard document that directly contradicts the official story. The investigators photograph everything, their fingers trembling as they turn the fragile pages. It feels like trespassing into a truth that was never meant to surface. The paper is brittle, its edges flaking at the touch, but the ink is legible, undeniable. Paper has outlived bureaucracy's attempts to bury it. What strikes them most is the banality of it. There are no dramatic confessions, no written acknowledgement of crime, only logs of hours worked, materials moved, crews assigned, ordinary bureaucracy hiding in plain sight. Yet in the very ordinariness lies the horror. Lives disappeared into the quiet machinery of paperwork, sealed behind language meant to obscure. It was never meant to be sensational. It was meant to be buried beneath the weight of routine. The investigators leave the basement with copies of the most critical entries. But the sense of gravity lingers. The paper trail does more than corroborate rumors. It establishes a timeline, a cast of names, and a physical order to the cover-up. The widow's testimony, the stamped concrete, the anonymous tape, they now stand on firmer ground. No longer whispers in the dark. They are tethered to ink and paper, to dates and times, to bureaucratic fingerprints that no press release can erase. And yet, with each piece of paper photographed, a sharper unease takes root. If the city fought so hard to suppress these files, then the act of uncovering them is not just historical, it is provocative. Someone, somewhere, still has a stake in keeping these pages unread. And by pulling them into the light, the investigators know they've crossed another threshold. The past is no longer just memory or rumor. It's documented fact waiting to be answered with either justice or retaliation. The decision to return to Elm Street is made with a mix of dread and resolve. The evidence they've gathered, the widow's testimony, the stamped concrete, the anonymous tape, the hidden logs, has built a picture too detailed to ignore. But paper and tape only suggest. To prove, they need the ground itself to speak. And so, under the cover of night, the investigators assemble a small crew of trusted specialists, a structural engineer, a forensics technician, and 2 laborers willing to work quietly, no questions asked. The plan is simple but dangerous. They will breach the sealed wall. The alley feels different now, heavier, as if the space itself has grown conscious of what is about to happen. The concrete plug looms like a tombstone, its 1994 stamp faint in the flashlight beams. Each echo of their footsteps bounces back too loudly, a reminder of how enclosed and secret this place has been for decades. The engineer marks the thinnest point of the seal with chalk, tracing a crude square where the concrete can be drilled without collapsing the surrounding structure. Every sound, the metallic whine of the drill, the crackle of stone fracturing, seems amplified in the night air. The first dust cloud rises, choking and acrid, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of old soil and lime. It has been sealed so tightly that even the air behind the wall feels trapped, pressing out through the fractures like a held breath finally released. The noise is deafening in the enclosed space. One investigator keeps glancing over his shoulder, half expecting the glare of headlights to appear at the alley's mouth, or uniformed figures to step out of the shadows. Every minute feels borrowed. As the square cut deepens, the laborers lever the slab forward with crowbars. At first it resists, groaning as if unwilling to give way. Then, with a sharp crack, the section shifts and tumbles outward, striking the ground with a thud that echoes down the length of the alley. Behind the hole yawns a dark cavity, the smell of damp earth rushing out with startling force. Their flashlights cut through the dust and reveal a narrow chamber, artificial, deliberate, lined with rough soil and reinforced beams. The chamber's floor is uneven, a patchwork of disturbed earth and hardened fill. At one end lies a mound of broken lumber and rusted metal, perhaps debris from the supposed reinforcement project. But scattered across the soil are objects that freeze every hand and silence every breath. A child's hair clip, faded pink plastic shaped like a butterfly. A torn strip of cloth, once part of a dress, its pattern of tiny flowers barely visible beneath the grime. These are not construction refuse. They are human artifacts, fragments of lives that should never have been here. The forensics technician crouches to examine the soil, her gloves brushing against something harder than dirt. She pulls free a fragment of leather, the corner of a shoe sole. small, unmistakably belonging to a child. The group exchanges glances, the kind that acknowledge both triumph and horror. They have crossed the line between suspicion and proof, but proof brings danger. As they catalog the site, one investigator notices something unnerving: fresh scuff marks in the dust along the inner wall. These aren't decades old, they're recent. Someone else has been here or tried to be not long ago. Whether they were attempting to remove evidence or ensure it remained hidden, the message is the same. The secret of Elm Street is not dormant. It is active, watched, contested. The chamber itself seems to resist their intrusion. Each movement kicks up clouds of grit that sting the eyes and burn the throat. The walls groan faintly with the weight of the earth above, threatening collapse if they linger too long. The engineer warns that the beams holding the space are makeshift, never designed for longevity. It was meant to last just long enough to be forgotten, not to withstand scrutiny 30 years later. Still, they recover what they can: photographs, soil samples, the hair clip, the cloth, the shoe fragment. Every artifact is bagged and labeled, though the act feels more like handling relics than evidence. Each item whispers of Emma and Claire, two girls who once walked home from school and never arrived. By the time they reseal the alley with a temporary barrier, dawn is brushing the sky pale. The investigators are exhausted, covered in dust, their nerves frayed. Yet beneath the exhaustion is a grim certainty. They have found what the city said never existed. The wall was not reinforcement. It was a tomb, a hiding place built to contain not just physical remains, but the memory of what was done. As they pack their tools, the investigator leading the group pauses, staring back at the rough hole they've carved. The words from the tape echo in his mind. Concrete doesn't cry. Concrete doesn't beg. And now, standing over the fragments of two stolen lives, he understands exactly what the man meant. The silence of that chamber is not empty. It is screaming. The discovery in the sealed chamber cannot remain a private horror for long. News has a way of leaking, especially when artifacts as unmistakable as a child's shoe and hair clip are involved. Within days, whispers spread through Elm Street, and soon local reporters appear, their cameras lingering on the alleyway where the wall once stood. What began as a hushed investigation explodes into public scrutiny. The press conferences that follow are chaotic. Flashes of cameras, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted over one another. The investigators stand on one side, weary but resolute, while city officials cluster on the other, rigid and defensive. The first wave of headlines is incendiary. Children's remains suspected in Elm Street seal and hidden chamber discovered. Did the city know? Residents gather outside City Hall, holding photocopied images of Emma and Claire, faces long frozen in school portraits, now elevated again as symbols of a wound never healed. For many, this case is not just about two missing girls, but about trust betrayed. If the city could bury this, what else might it have buried? Officials scramble to control the narrative. A hastily assembled panel of spokespersons insists the artifacts are inconclusive and may have been planted by malicious actors seeking attention. But their words ring hollow in the face of photographs already circulating online. Images of the stamped wall, the hollow chamber, the butterfly clip half buried in dirt. Denial seems less like caution and more like desperation. Public anger swells. Parents in particular voice outrage, demanding accountability for how a neighborhood was left to raise. Children on sidewalks hiding sealed cavities and secrets. Former classmates of the twins, now middle-aged, step forward to speak about the fear that lingered after 1994, the way parents forbade their children from walking home alone, the way the silence from authorities only deepened suspicion. The chamber has not only reopened a case, it has reopened decades of mistrust. Community meetings turn volatile. Residents shout at officials, demanding resignations. Some accuse the city of protecting powerful individuals at the expense of two little girls. Others demand federal involvement, convinced local leadership cannot be trusted. The press seizes on the drama, broadcasting footage of tearful citizens holding candles, of protesters painting the twins' names in bold letters across poster boards. Elm Street, once a quiet stretch of cracked sidewalks, becomes a focal point of national attention. For the investigators, the attention is both validation and threat. On one hand, the weight of public outcry makes it harder for the city to bury the case again. On the other, it exposes them to scrutiny from those who would rather the chamber had never been opened. Their phones ring with requests for interviews. Their inboxes overflow with tips, some useful, Many wild theories born from the fever of collective memory, and interspersed among them are darker messages, anonymous warnings to stop stirring ghosts, veiled threats reminding them that accidents happen. The fallout ripples beyond Elm Street. Regional newspapers re-examine unsolved disappearances from the same decade. Radio hosts speculate about corruption in the construction industry, questioning whether public works projects might have been used as a cover for crimes. A local senator calls for a formal inquiry, while the mayor insists that political opportunists are exploiting tragedy. The clash between those seeking transparency and those clinging to control grows sharper by the day. Amid all this, a quiet vigil is held near the alley. Dozens gather, lighting candles and laying flowers beneath a hand-painted sign that reads, "Emma and Claire Never Forgotten." Parents bring their children, explaining in hushed voices why the girl's story matters, why justice, though delayed, must not be denied. The sight is both beautiful and haunting, a reminder that even 30 years later, absence has a presence and silence has weight. Yet beneath the public grief and anger, the investigators sense something darker stirring. The louder the outrage grows, the more dangerous the opposition becomes. Officials can no longer rely on silence, but they can rely on intimidation, discrediting, or worse. The investigators realize they are no longer working in the shadows of forgotten files. They are in the glare of public consequence, a place where mistakes or threats can turn fatal. And as the crowd chants the twins' names outside City Hall demanding truth, one of the investigators notices a man standing at the edge of the vigil. He doesn't hold a candle. He doesn't chant. He simply watches, face shadowed, then slips away into the dark. The timing, the anonymity, it feels intentional. A silent reminder that while the city is being forced into the light, those who worked in the dark 30 years ago may still be moving there now. The storm breaks one night with almost cinematic cruelty. Rain lashes Elm Street in sheets, pounding against windows and turning the pavement into a slick black mirror. The investigators, following up on new leads, return to the sealed chamber with a cameraman and additional forensic gear, intending to gather clearer documentation before officials lock the site down. The alley is deserted, water streaming along the gutter, the plug they breached days before, covered by a flimsy barricade of plywood and hazard tape. But what waits beyond the barricade is not just damp soil and silence. It is a set-piece moment where buried secrets fight back. The barricade has been disturbed, nails pried loose, plywood sagging inward, the warning tape shredded and hanging in wet ribbons. At first glance, it looks like vandalism. But then they see the footprints, fresh impressions in the mud, heavy boots tracking in and out of the alley. Someone else has been here since their last visit. And judging from the broken lock, they weren't subtle. The group exchanges tense glances, their flashlights cutting across the slick concrete like nervous eyes. Inside the chamber, the air feels different. No longer stale, but unsettled, as if the space itself has been violated again. The soil mound where they found the child's clip and cloth has been disturbed, clawed through with crude force. Artifacts they had marked with flags are missing, gone without a trace, as if scooped out and carried away. The loss is devastating. Evidence they risked so much to uncover has been stolen, perhaps forever. But what stops them cold is what was left behind. On the chamber wall, scrawled in dark spray paint that still drips from the rain seeping in, are words meant as a warning. Leave it buried. The letters are jagged, uneven, but the message is unmistakable. Someone knew they would return. Someone wanted them to see this. It is no longer just an old cover-up. They are now in an active contest against forces still willing to protect it. The cameraman captures everything, the harsh glare of his light making the painted words gleam wet and sinister. But the footage also reveals something else. Small, glittering fragments embedded in the disturbed soil. The forensics technician carefully extracts them, holding them up to the light. They appear to be shards of broken glass, but not ordinary glass. These are fragments of an old cassette shell, the kind that would house magnetic tape, perhaps a copy of the anonymous recording, hidden here decades ago, now shattered by whoever ransacked the chamber. Even in destruction, the fragment becomes an artifact, a silent testimony that the tape was not a fabrication, but once physically connected to this very site. The scene grows more dangerous by the minute. A noise cuts through the rain, an engine revving at the alley's mouth, headlights slicing the dark. A truck sits idling, its driver just a silhouette behind the windshield, watching. The investigators freeze, the engine growling like an unspoken threat. Then just as suddenly the truck pulls away, tires splashing water, disappearing into the storm. The message is clear: you are being monitored and you are not untouchable. They finish quickly, gathering what fragments they can, photographing every detail of the disturbance. The chamber is unstable, the beams groaning louder now, as if the soil shifts restlessly above. The engineer insists they leave before collapse traps them inside. As they emerge into the alley, soaked through and rattled, the investigators feel the line between past and present blur completely. This is no longer just an excavation of memory. It is a battle against an adversary still alive, still invested, and still willing to intimidate. Later, reviewing the footage in safety, one detail chills them most of all. In the final frames before they fled, the camera caught something etched faintly into the soil, letters carved, crudely with a stick or tool. They spell a single word: north. It could be a direction. It could be a name. It could be the next thread in the labyrinth. But combined with the missing artifacts and the spray-painted warning, it feels like both clue and taunt, pulling them deeper into a story that refuses to stay silent. The set piece in the storm leaves the investigators shaken, but it also clarifies the stakes. The truth about Emma and Claire was not only buried 30 years ago, it is still being actively erased, fought over, and protected. Each discovery drags the present further into the past, and with every step forward, the sense grows stronger that the girl's disappearance was not an isolated tragedy, but part of something larger, something that stretches beyond Elm Street, toward a place, north, waiting in the shadows. The word carved into the soil, north, becomes an obsession. The investigators pore over maps of the city from the mid-1990s, cross-referencing construction projects, utility records, and forgotten parcels of land. The direction could point to anything: a road, a neighborhood, a facility. Hours of searching narrow the possibilities to one place with uncanny resonance: a disused municipal storage yard at the city's northern edge, decommissioned in 1997 and left to rot ever since. The yard once housed equipment for public works crews, including the same contractors who poured the Elm Street sidewalks in 1994. The site visit is tense from the outset. The chain-link fence that surrounds the yard is rusted and sagging, topped with barbed wire curling downward like claws. A faded sign reads "Authorized personnel only," though no personnel have been authorized here in decades. The gate hangs open, swinging lazily in the autumn wind, as if inviting or daring them to step inside. Weeds push through cracked asphalt, and the skeletal remains of heavy machinery sit rusting in rows, their hulks looming like monuments to abandonment. The group splits their focus. Half document the exterior while others venture into the yard's main warehouse. Inside, the air is thick with mold and dust, the roof sagging from years of leaks. Rows of shelves still hold forgotten supplies, traffic cones, broken signs, rusted padlocks. But tucked among this detritus are anomalies that don't belong. Stacks of cement bags labeled with purchase, orders dated months after the Elm Street project officially concluded. Blueprints stamped with city logos but missing signatures from oversight committees. Each paper, each mark, is a thread that unravels the official story. The most haunting find comes from a locked metal cabinet pried open with a crowbar. Inside lies a cache of artifacts. Not unlike the chamber, though. These are documents, not objects. Manila folders stuffed with incident reports, work logs, and handwritten notes. Some pages are water-damaged, others deliberately blacked out with thick marker. But enough legible fragments remain to expose a pattern. Repeated references to delays on EST, project, loss of materials, and cryptic initials scrawled beside, dates that match the week of the twins' disappearance. One log even lists an unscheduled night shift, marked only with a dash and the word covered. The documents make it clear. City workers were present on Elm Street far later than records admitted. Equipment was moved under cover of night. Cement was poured after official inspections closed. Someone used the authority of public works to hide something permanent in the concrete, and then filed paperwork to erase the trail. The cover-up wasn't sloppy. It was systematic, layered with falsified dates and sanitized reports. Among the files is a smaller envelope, unmarked but sealed with brittle tape. Inside are photographs, their edges curling with age. Grainy, poorly lit images of the Elm Street sidewalk before it was repaired, with figures faintly visible in the frame, men in reflective vests standing near what looks like an open trench. In one photo, a shadowy shape near the trench resembles a child's bicycle. The though the quality makes certainty impossible. Still, the implication is chilling. The workers who poured the final layer of cement might have known, or even participated in, the concealment. The discovery sends shockwaves through the group. It is one thing to suspect negligence, another to see paperwork and photographs pointing directly to collusion. But the cache also raises a darker question. If these documents survived here, neglected in a rusting cabinet, what else was removed or destroyed elsewhere? And who had the power to orchestrate a deception that spanned city offices, contractors and inspectors? Before they can absorb the full weight of the evidence, they notice something unsettling. A fresh cigarette butt smolders on the warehouse floor near the doorway. It is still warm, the ash intact. Someone has been here recently, watching, perhaps even while they searched. A cold dread fills the air as the investigators realize they may not be alone. The yard is vast, filled with shadows and hiding places. Every creak of the building becomes a threat, every echo a possible step. They leave with the files and photos, retreating under the weight of both triumph and terror. What they carry could blow open the case in the public sphere, providing tangible proof that Emma and Claire's disappearance was entwined with official misconduct. But it also paints targets on their backs, proof that is too dangerous for some to allow into daylight. As they drive away from the northern yard, headlights catch the faded stenciled letters still visible on the warehouse's wall. Storage Unit Inn. The word north was never just a direction. It was a designation, a breadcrumb leading straight to this forgotten place. And whatever else it was meant to conceal, the files and the investigators' hands have transformed the mystery from suspicion into indictment. The next move, they know, will no longer happen in silence. It will play out before the community, in the brutal light of public consequence. The evidence from the northern yard is too explosive to keep confined to private notes or whispered speculation. The investigators know that secrecy has been the enemy all along. Silence allowed Emma and Claire to vanish. Silence allowed a chamber to be sealed. Silence allowed records to be falsified. Breaking that silence is both their duty and their only protection. So they prepare the files, the photographs, and the fragments into a comprehensive packet and deliver it to the press. Within days, the story erupts into the public sphere with the force of a storm. Television anchors frame it as a scandal decades in the making. Headlines scream from front pages. 1994 disappearance. Tied to city project cover-up and leaked. Files suggest night crews hid evidence. The grainy photos of reflective vests near the Elm Street trench run on repeat, zoomed and analyzed. The blurred bicycle-shaped silhouette circled in red. Talk radio buzzes with outrage. Social media feeds boil with anger. The twins' names, forgotten by many outside Elm Street for 30 years, trend nationwide. Community fallout is immediate. Candlelight vigils swell into mass gatherings, no longer solemn, but charged with indignation. Parents, children, former classmates, all demand answers in the square outside City Hall. Chanting rises, echoing against the marble facade. What did they know, and when? The names Emma and Claire are painted in bold letters across homemade banners. For the first time in decades, their absence feels present, alive, undeniable. City officials, blindsided, scramble to regain control. A press conference is called, staged with the mayor and police chief flanked by grim-faced aides. Their tone is defensive, framing the leaked files as unverified and the photographs as inconclusive. They stress that tampered evidence cannot be trusted, that outsiders with agendas are manipulating grief. But as the questions from reporters grow sharper about mismatched logs, night shifts, missing children, the officials falter. The footage of them sweating beneath the hot lights becomes its own indictment. Proof not of guilt perhaps, but of evasion. Into this pressure steps the twins' surviving relatives, long silent, now compelled to speak. A cousin, voice breaking, addresses the crowd. We were told to move on. We were told to trust the process. And all this time, there were lies in filing. Cabinets while our family suffered. In the dark, the statement cuts deeper than any journalist's demand. Turning the rally into something larger than a protest, it becomes a reckoning. The consequence ripples outward. Local representatives call for a grand jury. Activists demand an independent federal investigation. Retired city employees are tracked down by reporters. Their names and old payroll records splashed across articles. Some deny knowledge, others retreat behind no comment, but a few faces, lined with years of quiet, suggest, in guarded phrases, that things on Elm Street were never as routine as officials claimed. One even mutters to a journalist off camera, "We were told not to ask questions." The investigators watch this unfold with both vindication and unease. The story has reached the public, forcing accountability, but it has also unleashed a wave of unpredictable forces. Threats arrive more boldly now, slipped into their mailboxes or left as voicemails at odd hours. They notice unfamiliar cars idling near their homes, strangers loitering too long outside meeting places. Yet they press on, knowing retreat now would only confirm the city's hope that memory can be erased. The climax of this public confrontation comes at a televised city hearing. Officials attempt to dismiss the files as forgeries, waving off the photos as misinterpreted shadows. But then a whistleblower appears, an aging former clerk who handled public works records in the 1990s. In trembling testimony, he admits that files were removed from the official archive under orders, and some were redirected to off-site storage that was never inventoried. His words confirm the essence of the conspiracy. The city not only buried the chamber in cement, but buried its own paper trail to protect itself. The hearing room erupts. The mayor pounds the gavel, demanding order, but the crowd is beyond containment. Reporters rush to file urgent updates. Cameras catch the chaos, and outside, chants of justice for Emma and Claire echo into the night. The officials' carefully constructed counter-narrative collapses under the weight of exposure. What once seemed an isolated tragedy now reads as a systemic failure, a betrayal carried out not just by individuals, but by institutions sworn to protect. And yet, even in the midst of public triumph, a note of unease lingers. The files are damning but incomplete. The photographs suggest more than they prove. The whistleblower's testimony opens doors but leaves others closed. For every revelation, there are shadows still unexamined, and names still unspoken. The investigators know the story is not finished. The girl's absence demands more than outrage. It demands closure. As the crowd disperses from City Hall, the investigators stand apart, watching the banners fold, the candles extinguish. For the first time, the whole city carries the weight of Emma and Claire. But for those who first uncovered the chamber, the weight has only grown heavier. The public has seen enough to demand justice. What remains unseen, the final piece of the puzzle, the truth of what really happened that night in 1994, still waits in silence. The hearings leave the city rattled, the officials cornered, and the public awakened. Yet even with the uproar, the central truth remains just out of reach. Emma and Claire are still gone, their fate unresolved. The investigators return to Elm Street, drawn back to the origin point like moths to the ember of a fire that refuses to die. The alley is quieter now, the barricades removed, the chamber sealed again for safety. But something about the place feels different. Less a crime scene and more a grave. Flowers and stuffed animals left by mourners cluster against the wall, already dampened by autumn rain. It is no longer just concrete. It is a memorial. Here, the investigators reflect on the journey. 30 years of silence broken by a single clue, unearthed by accident. A sealed wall leading to a chamber of secrets. Tapes, letters, and photographs that forced memory into the present. Files dragged out of a rusted cabinet in the northern yard, proof of collusion. And finally, a community rising against officials who thought they could bury truth in concrete. The story is larger than Emma and Claire. It is about every case dismissed, every voice ignored, every family told to move on while records were quietly doctored. Yet in the quiet of the alley, it is also deeply personal, unbearably human. The investigators stand with the twins, surviving relatives during a small memorial service. Candles flicker in the dusk, their light catching on laminated school photos of the girls, now brittle with age. A minister speaks of lost innocence, of unanswered prayers, of the duty to remember. The relatives speak too, their voices soft but resolute. Emma and Claire were not statistics, not symbols, but children who laughed, fought, dreamed. For the first time, the case feels less like a puzzle to be solved and more like a legacy to be carried. Closure arrives not in the form of a neat solution, but in acknowledgement. The files and testimony ensure the city can no longer pretend ignorance. The community vows to hold inquiries until every lead is exhausted. The twins' names are etched into collective memory, not just as victims, but as catalysts for truth. The investigators sense that justice, though delayed, has begun to move. It may not deliver every answer, but it has broken the silence that once entombed them. And yet, even as the candles burn down and the mourners disperse, an open thread lingers. Among the files from the northern yard, one small overlooked scrap of paper remains. It is a corner of a log sheet, torn and water-stained, with a faint penciled note in the margin, Unit End Transfer, see Caledonia. The word leaps out like a whisper across decades. Caledonia. A place? A person? Another site waiting in the shadows? The investigators pocket the scrap quietly, not sharing it with the grieving family just yet. Tonight is for remembrance, not new mysteries. But they know the story is not finished. Elm Street has given up part of its secret, but not all. Emma and Claire have been returned to the public eye, but their final chapter remains unwritten. As they leave the alley, the street lamps buzz faintly above, their glow stretching across the slick pavement. The neighborhood is hushed, but the silence no longer feels complicit. It feels watchful, as though history itself is waiting for what comes next. The investigators walk into the night carrying both burden and resolve. The girls are no longer forgotten. The truth is no longer sealed. And somewhere north, or perhaps in Caledonia, another sealed door waits.